Beneath the surface of every thought you have ever spoken aloud, beneath the deliberate choices and the words you rehearse before saying them, there exists a vast, silent intelligence that has been shaping your life since before you could remember your own name. The subconscious mind is not a metaphor. It is not a poetic abstraction or a spiritual concept divorced from biology. It is a measurable, observable network of neural processes that operates continuously, tirelessly, beneath the threshold of your awareness, processing information at speeds your conscious mind cannot match, storing memories you cannot access at will, making decisions before you realize a choice has been made. The subconscious is the architect of your inner world, the silent engineer of your emotional landscape, the keeper of every sensation, every image, every fragment of experience that has ever passed through your senses. It does not sleep when you sleep. It does not rest when you rest. It is always working, always listening, always building the invisible scaffolding upon which your conscious experience rests. The division between conscious and subconscious is not a clean line but a gradient, a spectrum of awareness that shifts moment by moment. Consciousness is the narrow beam of a flashlight in a dark room, illuminating only what it points toward, leaving everything else in shadow. The subconscious is the room itself, vast and filled with objects you cannot see, but that shape your movement nonetheless. When you walk through a familiar space in the dark, your conscious mind may be thinking about something entirely different, but your subconscious remembers the layout, the placement of furniture, the height of doorways, and it guides your body through the space without collision, without error, without conscious effort. This is the subconscious at work, silent, competent, invisible. Neuroscience has revealed that the conscious mind can process approximately 40 to 50 bits of information per second. This sounds impressive, until you realize that the subconscious processes roughly 11 million bits per second. The disparity is staggering, almost incomprehensible. Your conscious awareness is a tiny island in an ocean of subconscious processing, a single voice in a chorus of millions. Every sensory input, the pressure of your clothing against your skin, the ambient temperature of the room, the subtle variations in light and shadow, the distant sounds of traffic or wind or machinery, is registered, analyzed, and stored by the subconscious, even as your conscious mind focuses on reading these words, on following this narrative, on the deliberate act of attention. The subconscious is always gathering, always cataloging, always preparing you for what comes next. The subconscious does not think in words. It thinks in patterns and associations, in images and emotions and bodily sensations. It is pre-verbal, existing in a realm that predates language, that operates according to logic that is not linear, not sequential, but holistic, simultaneous, multidimensional. When you meet someone for the first time and feel an immediate sense of trust or distrust, that is the subconscious speaking, drawing on thousands of micro-observations, facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, pheromones, and comparing them to patterns stored from every previous human interaction you have ever had. The conscious mind may not know why you feel what you feel, may struggle to articulate the reasons, but the subconscious has already made its assessment, has already sent signals through your body, has already prepared you to approach or withdraw. The subconscious is the repository of implicit memory, the storehouse of everything you have learned but cannot consciously recall. When you ride a bicycle, you do not consciously think about balance, about the micro-adjustments of your body weight, about the precise angle of the handlebars or the pressure on the pedals. These actions are governed by the subconscious, by motor programs that were painstakingly learned through repetition and then automated, transferred from conscious effort to subconscious competence. The same is true for walking, for typing, for driving, for playing a musical instrument, for speaking your native language. These skills, once requiring intense concentration, have been absorbed into the subconscious, freeing your conscious mind to focus on higher-order tasks, on creativity, on problem-solving, on the experience of being alive. The subconscious is also the guardian of your emotional life, the regulator of feelings that would otherwise overwhelm you. Traumatic memories, painful experiences, unbearable emotions. These are often pushed below the surface, not forgotten but held at a distance, protected by the subconscious so that you can function, so that you can continue to engage with the world without being paralyzed by the past. This is not denial, not repression in the pathological sense, but a necessary mechanism of psychological survival. The subconscious knows what you can handle and what you cannot, and it adjusts the flow of information accordingly, allowing certain memories to surface when you are ready, when the context is safe, when the conditions are right for processing and integration. The relationship between the conscious and subconscious is not hierarchical, but collaborative. The conscious mind sets intentions, makes plans, articulates goals. The subconscious executes, automates, and supports. When you decide to learn a new skill, your conscious mind directs your attention, but it is the subconscious that consolidates the learning, that strengthens the neural pathways through repetition, that transforms effortful practice into effortless performance. When you set a goal to wake up at a certain time, your conscious mind may forget, may drift into sleep, but the subconscious often remembers, often wakes you moments before the alarm, having tracked the passage of time through internal biological rhythms that operate entirely outside of conscious awareness. The subconscious is shaped by experience, by repetition, by the accumulation of moments that form the texture of your life. Every conversation you have ever had, every book you have ever read, every place you have ever been, every person you have ever met, all of this is encoded, stored, woven into the fabric of your subconscious mind. Some of these memories are accessible, retrievable through conscious effort. Others are buried, inaccessible to conscious recall but still active, still influencing your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, in ways you do not recognize. You are, in a very real sense, the sum of your subconscious experiences, the product of countless invisible processes that have been shaping you since birth, since before birth, since the first firing of neurons in the developing brain. The subconscious operates according to principles that are different from conscious reasoning. It does not distinguish between reality and imagination, between past and present, between self and other, in the same way the conscious mind does. When you vividly imagine an experience, the subconscious responds as if the experience is real, activating the same neural pathways, releasing the same neurochemicals, creating the same emotional responses. This is why visualization techniques are effective, why mental rehearsal improves performance, why the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you are capable of have such profound effects on your actual capabilities. The subconscious believes what it is shown, what it is told, what it experiences, and it adjusts your internal state accordingly. The inner landscape of the subconscious has a texture, a quality that is difficult to describe in words, because it exists before words, beneath words, in a realm where meaning is felt rather than articulated. When you close your eyes and turn your attention inward, when you move past the surface chatter of conscious thought, there is a depth, a stillness, a presence that is both familiar and mysterious. This is the subconscious revealing itself, not through language, not through images, but through the quality of awareness itself, through the sense of vastness, of space, of something larger than the narrow focus of everyday consciousness. It is the feeling of standing at the edge of an ocean at night, knowing that the water extends far beyond what you can see, that depths exist that you will never fully explore, that currents move beneath the surface that shape everything above. The subconscious is also the source of creativity, the wellspring from which new ideas emerge. When you struggle with a problem, when you consciously analyze and deliberate, and still cannot find a solution, it is often the subconscious that provides the breakthrough, that makes the unexpected connection, that sees the pattern that conscious reasoning missed. This is why solutions often come in moments of relaxation, in the shower, during a walk, in the hypnagogic state between waking and sleeping. The conscious mind steps back, and the subconscious steps forward, free to explore, to associate, to synthesize information in ways that are not constrained by logic, by convention, by the linear thinking that characterizes conscious thought. The study of the subconscious has a long history, stretching back to the early days of psychology, to Freud and Jung and the psychoanalytic tradition. But modern neuroscience has moved beyond metaphor, beyond speculation, to direct observation of the brain in action. Functional MRI scans reveal the regions of the brain that activate during subconscious processing, showing activity in areas associated with emotion, memory, pattern recognition, and motor control. Electroencephalography captures the electrical rhythms of the brain, revealing the oscillations that correspond to different states of consciousness, to the transitions between waking and sleeping, between focused attention and diffuse awareness. These technologies have confirmed what philosophers and mystics have long suspected, that the mind is far larger than consciousness, that the self extends far beyond the boundaries of what we can directly perceive. The rhythms of the subconscious are biological, cyclical, tied to the oscillations of neurons, to the release and reuptake of neurotransmitters, to the slow waves of deep sleep and the rapid firing of REM. These rhythms are not random, but organized, synchronized across different regions of the brain, creating coherent patterns of activity that correspond to different mental states, different modes of processing. During waking hours, the brain operates in beta and gamma frequencies, fast oscillations associated with active thinking, with problem solving, with engagement with the external world. As you relax, as you prepare for sleep, the brain shifts into alpha and theta frequencies, slower rhythms associated with daydreaming, with meditation, with the transition into sleep. In deep sleep, the brain enters delta frequencies, the slowest oscillations, and it is here that the subconscious does some of its most important work, consolidating memories, clearing metabolic waste, repairing neural connections, preparing the brain for the next day. The subconscious is not a single entity, but a collection of systems, of modules, of specialized processes that work in parallel, that communicate through networks of neurons, through cascades of neurotransmitters, through electrical and chemical signals that propagate through the brain at speeds measured in milliseconds. There is the subconscious that regulates your heartbeat, your breathing, your digestion, the autonomic processes that keep you alive without conscious intervention. There is the subconscious that stores procedural memories, that governs skilled movements, that allows you to perform complex actions without thinking. There is the subconscious that processes emotions, that evaluates threats, that triggers the fight or flight response before you consciously recognize danger. There is the subconscious that encodes episodic memories, that reconstructs the past, that provides the sense of continuity, of narrative, of a self that persists through time. These systems do not operate in isolation, but interact, influence each other, create emergent properties that cannot be reduced to the sum of their parts. The subconscious is a symphony, not a solo instrument, and the music it creates is the background hum of your existence, the constant, mostly unnoticed presence that shapes your perception, your mood, your sense of reality. When you feel anxious without knowing why, when you feel drawn to certain people or places, when you make a decision that seems to come from nowhere, that is the subconscious expressing itself, communicating through feelings, through impulses, through the subtle shifts in your internal state, that precede conscious thought. The power of the subconscious lies in its capacity for learning, for adaptation, for change. Neural plasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, to form new connections, to strengthen or weaken existing pathways, is the mechanism by which the subconscious evolves, by which it incorporates new information, new experiences, new patterns. Every time you practice a skill, every time you repeat a behavior, every time you expose yourself to a new stimulus, you are reshaping your subconscious. You are training it, you are programming it to respond in certain ways. This is both empowering and sobering, because it means that the subconscious can be shaped intentionally through deliberate practice, through conscious effort. But it also means that the subconscious is shaped unintentionally through passive exposure, through the environments you inhabit, through the media you consume, through the people you spend time with. The subconscious does not judge. It does not evaluate the quality or the morality of the information it receives. It simply absorbs, encodes, integrates. If you repeatedly expose yourself to negative messages, to images of violence or scarcity or fear, the subconscious will encode these patterns, will begin to see the world through this lens, will prepare you to respond to a reality that is hostile, threatening, dangerous. If you expose yourself to positive messages, to images of beauty or abundance or connection, the subconscious will encode these patterns instead, will begin to see the world as a place of opportunity, of safety, of potential. The subconscious is neutral, but its effects are not. What you feed it matters. There is a quality to subconscious awareness that is wordless, imageless, pure. It is the sense of being that exists before you name yourself, before you categorize your experience, before you divide the world into subject and object, self and other. Infants possess this awareness, this undifferentiated consciousness that experiences the world as a seamless whole, without boundaries, without separation. As we develop language, as we learn to think in concepts, we lose direct access to this state. But it never disappears. It remains in the background, in the subconscious, as the foundation upon which all other experience is built. In moments of deep meditation, in states of flow, in the seconds before sleep, you can sometimes touch this awareness again, can feel the edges of your constructed self dissolve, can experience the world as the subconscious experiences it, immediate, whole, alive. And as you rest now, as you allow your body to settle, as you feel the weight of your limbs sinking into the surface beneath you, you can sense the presence of your own subconscious, the quiet intelligence that is always there, always listening, always working. You do not need to control it, do not need to direct it, do not need to understand it fully. You only need to acknowledge it, to trust it, to allow it to do what it has always done, to process, to integrate, to prepare you for the next moment, the next breath, the next dream. The subconscious is the silent architect, and it is building, even now, the foundation of your tomorrow. Every night, when consciousness fades and the waking world dissolves, your subconscious begins to speak in a language older than words, constructing narratives from fragments of memory, weaving symbols and sensations into dreams that feel more real than reality itself. Dreams are not random noise, not meaningless static generated by a sleeping brain. They are the subconscious processing reality, sorting through the accumulated experiences of the day, the week, the lifetime, extracting patterns, consolidating memories, integrating new information with old, resolving emotional conflicts, rehearsing future scenarios, and communicating truth that the conscious mind cannot or will not acknowledge. Dreams are the subconscious thinking out loud, expressing itself in the only language it knows, the language of images, of metaphors, of emotional resonance, of symbolic representation. To understand dreams is to understand how the subconscious perceives the world, how it organizes information, how it makes sense of the chaos of lived experience. The architecture of dreams is fluid, non-linear, unconstrained by the laws of physics or logic that govern waking life. In dreams, you can fly, can breathe underwater, can be in two places simultaneously, can encounter people who are alive and dead at the same time, can experience emotions with an intensity that would be overwhelming in waking life. This fluidity is not a bug, but a feature, a reflection of how the subconscious actually operates. The subconscious does not think in straight lines, does not follow cause and effect in the way conscious reasoning does. It thinks associatively, connecting ideas based on emotional similarity, on symbolic resonance, on patterns that may not be obvious to the conscious mind. Dreams reveal this associative logic, this web of connections that exists beneath the surface of conscious thought. The content of dreams is drawn from memory, but not in a straightforward way. Dreams do not simply replay the events of the day like a video recording. Instead, they remix, recombine, and reimagine these events, blending recent experiences with older memories, with fears, with desires, with unresolved conflicts, creating new narratives that feel familiar yet strange, recognizable yet alien. A person you met yesterday might appear in a dream with the face of someone you knew in childhood. A place you visited last week might merge with a location from a recurring dream you have had for years. The subconscious is not concerned with factual accuracy, with chronological order, with the boundaries between past and present. It is concerned with emotional truth, with psychological significance, with the underlying patterns that connect disparate experiences. The emotional intensity of dreams is often greater than the emotional intensity of waking life. You can wake from a dream feeling terrified, elated, heartbroken, relieved, experiencing emotions so powerful that they linger for hours, coloring your mood, influencing your thoughts, affecting your behavior. This intensity is not accidental. The subconscious uses emotion as a signal, as a way of highlighting what is important, what needs attention, what requires processing. A recurring nightmare is not the subconscious tormenting you, but the subconscious trying to get your attention, trying to bring to consciousness something that has been suppressed, something that needs to be acknowledged, integrated, resolved. The fear you feel in the dream is the subconscious saying, "This matters. Pay attention. Deal with this." Dreams serve multiple functions, and neuroscience has begun to map these functions to specific stages of sleep, to specific patterns of brain activity. During REM sleep, when most vivid dreaming occurs, the brain is highly active, almost as active as during waking hours, but the activity is different. The prefrontal cortex, the region associated with logical reasoning, with self-awareness, with executive control, is relatively quiet. Meanwhile, the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, is highly active, along with the visual cortex, the motor cortex, and the areas involved in memory consolidation. This pattern of activation creates the characteristic features of dreams: vivid imagery, intense emotion, bizarre narratives, lack of self-awareness, acceptance of impossible scenarios as normal. One of the primary functions of dreaming is memory consolidation, the process by which short-term memories are transferred to long-term storage, by which new information is integrated with existing knowledge, by which the brain decides what to keep and what to discard. During sleep, the hippocampus, the brain region critical for forming new memories, replays the experiences of the day, sending signals to the cortex, where these experiences are encoded into more permanent storage. This replay is not passive, but active, selective, guided by the emotional significance of the experience, by its relevance to existing knowledge, by its potential utility for the future. Dreams are the subjective experience of this process, the conscious awareness of the subconscious, sorting, filing, organizing the vast amount of information that enters the brain every day. Dreams also serve a problem-solving function, allowing the subconscious to work on challenges that the conscious mind has struggled with. to explore solutions that are not constrained by conventional thinking, by habitual patterns, by the limitations of waking logic. There are countless examples of scientific discoveries, artistic creations, and personal insights that emerged from dreams. Dmitry Mendeleev reportedly saw the periodic table in a dream. Auguste Kekulé discovered the ring structure of benzene after dreaming of a snake biting its own tail. Paul McCartney heard the melody for Yesterday in a dream. These are not coincidences, but examples of the subconscious doing what it does best: making connections, seeing patterns, synthesizing information in ways that the conscious mind cannot. The problem-solving capacity of dreams is related to the way the subconscious processes information. During waking hours, the conscious mind tends to approach problems analytically, breaking them down into components, examining each part separately, following logical steps towards a solution. This approach is effective for many types of problems, but it can also be limiting, can create blind spots, can prevent you from seeing the bigger picture, from recognizing unconventional solutions. The subconscious, freed from the constraints of linear thinking, can approach the same problem holistically, can see connections that span different domains, can combine ideas that seem unrelated, can arrive at solutions that are creative, unexpected, elegant. Dreams provide a space for this kind of thinking, a laboratory where the subconscious can experiment, can test hypotheses, can explore possibilities without the interference of conscious judgment. Dreams also serve an emotional regulation function, helping to process and integrate difficult emotions, to reduce the intensity of traumatic memories, to maintain psychological equilibrium. Research has shown that REM sleep, the stage most associated with dreaming, plays a critical role in emotional processing. During REM sleep, the brain processes emotional memories in a context of reduced noradrenergic activity, meaning that the emotional content is reactivated, but without the full physiological stress response that accompanied the original experience. This allows the brain to process the memory, to extract its meaning, to integrate it into the broader narrative of your life without being overwhelmed by the emotion. Over time, this process reduces the emotional charge of the memory, allows you to remember the event without reliving the trauma, allows you to move forward without being trapped in the past. The symbolic language of dreams is universal in others. Certain symbols appear across cultures, across time periods, suggesting that they tap into something fundamental about human psychology, about the structure of the subconscious itself. Water often represents emotion, the unconscious, the flow of life. Flying often represents freedom, transcendence, escape from limitations. Falling often represents loss of control, anxiety, fear of failure. Houses often represent the self, with different rooms corresponding to different aspects of personality, different levels of consciousness. These symbols are not arbitrary, but arise from the way the subconscious organizes experience, from the metaphors that are built into the structure of thought itself. At the same time, the specific meaning of a symbol in a dream is always personal, always contextual, always dependent on your individual history, your associations, your current life circumstances. Water might represent emotion in general, but the specific emotion, the specific meaning, depends on the context of the dream, on your relationship with water, on what water has meant in your life. For one person, water might be soothing, healing, life-giving. For another, it might be threatening, overwhelming, associated with drowning, with loss. The subconscious uses symbols not as fixed codes, but as flexible metaphors, as ways of expressing complex emotional and psychological states in a form that can be experienced, felt, understood at a level deeper than words. The narrative structure of dreams, the way they unfold as stories, reflects the way the subconscious organizes experience. Humans are storytelling creatures. We do not experience life as a series of disconnected moments, but as a narrative, a story with a beginning, a middle, an end, with characters, with conflicts, with resolutions. The subconscious uses this narrative structure to make sense of experience, to create coherence, to find meaning. Dreams are the stories the subconscious tells itself, the narratives it constructs to integrate new information, to resolve conflicts, to rehearse possible futures, to explore different versions of the self. The bizarreness of dream narratives, the way they shift and change, the way they violate the rules of waking reality, is not a failure of coherence, but a different kind of coherence. A coherence based on emotional and symbolic logic, rather than factual and causal logic. Lucid dreaming, the state in which you become aware that you are dreaming while the dream is still occurring, represents a unique intersection of conscious and subconscious awareness. In a lucid dream, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active, bringing online the capacities for self-awareness, for critical thinking, for intentional control, while the dream itself continues, while the subconscious continues to generate imagery, to create scenarios, to respond to your intentions. Lucid dreaming allows you to interact with the subconscious directly, to ask questions, to explore the dream environment, to experiment with the malleability of the dream world. Some people use lucid dreaming for creative exploration, for problem solving, for confronting fears, for experiencing scenarios that are impossible in waking life. The practice of lucid dreaming reveals that the boundary between conscious and subconscious is permeable, that with practice, with intention, you can learn to navigate both realms simultaneously. The forgetting of dreams is as significant as the dreaming itself. Most dreams are forgotten within minutes of waking, fading from memory like mist in sunlight, leaving behind only fragments, only impressions, only the residue of emotion. This forgetting is not a failure of memory, but a feature of how the brain prioritizes information. The subconscious is processing vast amounts of information during sleep, and not all of it needs to be consciously remembered. The forgetting allows the conscious mind to focus on waking life, to engage with the present moment, without being overwhelmed by the symbolic narratives of the night. The dreams that are remembered, the ones that linger, are often the ones that carry the most emotional weight, the most psychological significance, the most urgent messages from the subconscious. The practice of dream journaling, of recording dreams immediately upon waking, can strengthen the bridge between conscious and subconscious, can improve dream recall, can reveal patterns that are not apparent from individual dreams. Over time, a dream journal becomes a record of the subconscious, a map of your inner landscape, showing recurring themes, recurring symbols, recurring conflicts, revealing the preoccupations of the subconscious, the issues it is working on, the questions it is trying to answer. The act of writing down a dream, of translating the symbolic language of the subconscious into the verbal language of consciousness, is itself a form of integration, a way of bringing the insights of the night into the awareness of the day. Nightmares, though distressing, are not enemies but messengers. They are the subconscious using fear to get your attention, to highlight something that needs to be addressed, something that is being avoided, something that is threatening your psychological well-being. The content of a nightmare is often symbolic, not literal. A dream of being chased does not necessarily mean you are in physical danger, but might represent avoidance, the feeling of running from something you do not want to face. A dream of falling might represent a loss of control, a fear of failure, a sense of instability in some area of your life. By examining the nightmare, by asking what it might be trying to communicate, you can gain insight into the underlying issue, can begin to address it consciously, can reduce the need for the subconscious to express it through fear. The hypnagogic state, the transitional state between waking and sleeping, is a window into the subconscious, a moment when the boundary between conscious and subconscious is particularly thin. In this state, you might experience vivid imagery, hear voices, feel sensations that are not coming from the external world, but from the subconscious. These experiences are not hallucinations in the pathological sense, but glimpses of the subconscious mind, of the constant stream of imagery and sensation that flows beneath the surface of waking consciousness. The hypnagogic state has been used by artists, by inventors, by thinkers throughout history as a source of inspiration, as a way of accessing the creative potential of the subconscious. Salvador Dali famously used a technique of holding a key while falling asleep, allowing it to drop and wake him at the moment of transition, capturing the surreal imagery of the hypnagogic state. And as you drift now, as you feel the pull of sleep, as the boundaries of your waking self begin to soften, you can trust that your subconscious is preparing to speak, to process, to integrate, to create the dreams that will carry you through the night. You do not need to understand every symbol, do not need to remember every narrative, do not need to control the process. You only need to let go, to allow the subconscious to do its work, to trust that the language of dreams, though strange, though symbolic, though sometimes frightening, is always in service of your growth, your healing, your integration, your becoming. Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten, holds within its tissues and neural pathways a complete archive of every touch, every movement, every sensation you have ever experienced, encoded not in words or images, but in the silent language of muscle memory, of conditioned responses, of implicit knowledge that guides you through the world without conscious thought. Implicit memory is the memory you cannot consciously access, cannot verbally describe, cannot deliberately recall, yet it shapes your behavior, your preferences, your skills, your emotional responses in profound and pervasive ways. It is the memory of how to walk, how to ride a bicycle, how to type, how to speak your native language. It is the memory of the emotional associations you have formed with certain smells, certain sounds, certain places. It is the memory of traumatic experiences that your conscious mind has suppressed, but that your body still carries, still responds to, still protects you from. Implicit memory is the subconscious made tangible, the invisible made visible through action, through reaction, through the automatic responses that occur before conscious thought has time to intervene. The distinction between explicit and implicit memory is fundamental to understanding how the subconscious operates. Explicit memory, also called declarative memory, is the memory you can consciously recall and verbally describe, the memory of facts, of events, of experiences that you can deliberately bring to mind. Implicit memory, also called non-declarative memory, is the memory that expresses itself through performance, through behavior, through the body, without conscious awareness, without verbal mediation. When you remember the capital of France, you are using explicit memory. When you reach for a light switch in the dark and your hand finds it without conscious thought, you are using implicit memory. Both types of memory are essential. Both are constantly active, but they operate through different neural systems, serve different functions, follow different rules. Procedural memory, a type of implicit memory, is the memory of skills, of how to do things, of the sequences of movements that have been practiced so many times that they have become automatic. Learning a new skill, whether it is playing a musical instrument, typing on a keyboard, driving a car, or performing a surgical procedure, initially requires intense conscious attention, deliberate effort, constant monitoring of each movement, each action. The conscious mind is fully engaged, directing every step, correcting every error, building the neural pathways that will eventually support automatic performance. But with repetition, with practice, the skill gradually transfers from conscious control to subconscious control, from explicit memory to implicit memory, from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, the cerebellum, the motor cortex. The movements become fluid, effortless, requiring no conscious thought, freeing the conscious mind to focus on higher level aspects of the task, on strategy, on creativity, on expression. The transfer from conscious to subconscious control is not instantaneous but gradual, occurring over hundreds or thousands of repetitions as the neural pathways strengthen, as the synaptic connections becomes more efficient, as the pattern of activation becomes more stable, more reliable, more automatic. This is the process of skill acquisition, the mechanism by which practice makes perfect, the reason why musicians practice scales, why athletes drill basic movements, why surgeons perform simulated procedures before operating on real patients. Each repetition strengthens the implicit memory, deepens the groove, makes the skill more robust, more resistant to interference, more accessible under stress, under pressure, under conditions where conscious thought is compromised. Once a skill has been transferred to implicit memory, it becomes remarkably durable, remarkably resistant to forgetting. You can go years without riding a bicycle, and when you get back on, the skill returns almost immediately. The body remembers, the muscles remember, the balance systems remember, even if the conscious mind has no recollection of the learning process, no memory of the falls, the wobbles, the gradual mastery. This durability is one of the defining features of implicit memory, one of the reasons it is so valuable, so essential for navigating a complex world. The skills you learn, the patterns you automate, become part of you, become integrated into the fabric of your being, available whenever you need them, without conscious effort, without deliberate recall. Priming is another form of implicit memory, a subtle but powerful influence on perception, on thought, on behavior. Priming occurs when exposure to one stimulus influences your response to a subsequent stimulus without conscious awareness of the connection. If you are shown the word yellow and then asked to name a fruit, you are more likely to say banana than if you had not been primed. If you are exposed to words related to old age, words like wrinkled, grey, bingo, you will subsequently walk more slowly, will move more like an elderly person, without realizing that your behavior has been influenced. Priming demonstrates that the subconscious is constantly processing information, constantly making associations, constantly preparing you to respond to the environment in ways that are efficient, that are adaptive, that draw on past experience without requiring conscious deliberation. The effects of priming extend far beyond laboratory experiments. Advertising relies on priming, on creating associations between products and positive emotions, between brands and desirable identities, so that when you encounter the product in the store, you feel drawn to it, feel positive about it, without consciously remembering the advertisement, without being aware of the influence. Political campaigns use priming, repeating certain words, certain images, certain themes, so that when you think about a candidate, these associations come to mind, automatically shape your perception, influence your judgment. The environment you inhabit is constantly priming you, shaping your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, in ways that are invisible, that operate beneath the threshold of conscious awareness, that are mediated entirely by the subconscious. Emotional conditioning is a form of implicit memory that links neutral stimuli with emotional responses, creating associations that can last a lifetime, that can shape your preferences, your fears, your attractions in ways that seem irrational, that cannot be explained by conscious reasoning. The classic example is Pavlov's dogs, who learn to associate the sound of a bell with the arrival of food, so that eventually the bell alone would trigger salivation, would trigger the physiological response that had previously been triggered only by food. The same process occurs in humans, constantly, automatically, linking stimuli with emotions, creating a web of associations that guides behavior, that shapes experience, that operates entirely outside of conscious awareness. If you were bitten by a dog as a child, you might develop a fear of dogs that persists into adulthood, even if you have no conscious memory of the bite, even if you cannot explain why you feel afraid. The fear is an implicit memory encoded in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, and it triggers automatically whenever you encounter a dog, preparing your body to flee, to fight, to protect itself from a threat that may no longer exist. This is the power and the problem of implicit memory. It is adaptive. It protects you. It allows you to respond quickly to danger, but it can also trap you in patterns that are no longer useful, that are based on experiences that are no longer relevant, that limit your freedom, your growth, your ability to engage fully with the present moment. The body keeps the score, as trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk has famously written. Traumatic experiences are often encoded as implicit memories, stored in the body, in the nervous system, in the patterns of muscle tension, of breathing, of physiological arousal, even when the conscious mind has suppressed the memory, has pushed it out of awareness, has created amnesia for the event itself. The trauma survivor may not remember the trauma, may have no explicit memory of what happened, but the body remembers, and it responds, it reacts, it relives the trauma whenever it encounters a trigger, a reminder, a stimulus that resembles some aspect of the original experience. The flashbacks, the nightmares, the panic attacks, the hypervigilance, these are all manifestations of implicit memory of the body trying to protect itself from a threat that is no longer present, trying to process an experience that was too overwhelming to be integrated at the time it occurred. Healing from trauma often involves working with implicit memory, bringing the bodily sensations, the emotional responses, the automatic reactions into conscious awareness, creating a space where they can be felt, acknowledged, processed, integrated. This is the work of somatic therapies, of body-centered approaches that recognize that trauma is not just a mental event, but a whole body event, that healing requires not just talking about the trauma, but feeling it, moving through it, allowing the body to complete the responses that were interrupted, that were frozen, that were suppressed at the time of the trauma. The goal is not to erase the implicit memory, but to change its meaning, to create new associations, to teach the body that it is safe, that the threat has passed, that it can relax, can let go, can return to a state of equilibrium. The subconscious uses implicit memory to create habits, to automate behaviors that are repeated frequently, that serve a function, that allow you to navigate daily life with minimal conscious effort. Habits are neural pathways that have been strengthened through repetition, that have become the default response to certain cues, certain contexts, certain situations. When you wake up in the morning and automatically reach for your phone, that is a habit, an implicit memory of the sequence of actions that you have performed thousands of times. When you drive to work and arrive without consciously remembering the journey, that is a habit, the subconscious guiding you through a familiar route, while the conscious mind thinks about other things. Habits are efficient, they conserve mental energy, they allow you to function on autopilot, but they can also be limiting, can keep you stuck in patterns that no longer serve you, that prevent you from growing, from changing, from responding to new circumstances in new ways. Changing a habit requires conscious effort, requires interrupting the automatic sequence, requires creating new neural pathways, new associations, new implicit memories that can compete with the old ones. This is why habit change is difficult, why it requires repetition, why it requires patience, why it requires awareness of the cues that trigger the habit, of the rewards that reinforce it, of the contexts in which it occurs. The subconscious is not resistant to change, but it is conservative. It prefers the familiar, the proven, the automatic, and it requires consistent, repeated evidence that a new pattern is better, is more adaptive, is more aligned with your goals, before it will adopt the new pattern, before it will make it automatic, before it will encode it as implicit memory. The relationship between implicit and explicit memory is dynamic, interactive, constantly evolving. Explicit memories can become implicit through repetition, through practice, through the process of skill acquisition. Implicit memories can sometimes be brought into explicit awareness through focused attention, through therapeutic work, through practices like mindfulness that increase awareness of bodily sensations, of automatic reactions, of the subtle influences of the subconscious. The boundary between the two is not fixed but permeable, and the ability to move between them, to access both types of memory, to integrate them, is a sign of psychological flexibility, of mental health, of the capacity to learn, to grow, to adapt to changing circumstances. Implicit memory is also the foundation of intuition, of the gut feelings, the hunches, the immediate sense of knowing that arises without conscious reasoning, without deliberate analysis. When you meet someone and instantly feel that you can trust them, or that you should be cautious, that is implicit memory at work, drawing on thousands of previous social interactions, on patterns of facial expression, of body language, of tone of voice, on associations that have been encoded over a lifetime, that are too complex, too subtle, too numerous to be consciously articulated. The conscious mind may not know why you feel what you feel, but the subconscious knows, and it communicates through the body, through the feeling, through the intuition that guides you, that protects you, that helps you navigate the social world with a wisdom that transcends conscious thought. The study of implicit memory has revealed that much of what we call learning, much of what we call knowledge, much of what we call skill, exists not in the conscious mind but in the subconscious, not in words but in the body, not in deliberate recall but in automatic performance. This has profound implications for education, for therapy, for personal development, for understanding what it means to know something, to be competent, to be skilled. It suggests that true mastery is not about conscious understanding, but about embodied knowledge, about the integration of mind and body, about the transfer of learning from the conscious to the subconscious, from the explicit to the implicit, from effort to effortlessness. And as you rest now, as you allow your body to settle into stillness, you can feel the presence of your own implicit memories, the countless skills, the countless associations, the countless patterns that have been encoded over a lifetime that guide you, that support you, that allow you to function in the world with grace, with competence, with the quiet competence that comes from knowing, even when you do not know that you know. Your body remembers, and it is remembering now, processing, integrating, preparing you for tomorrow, for the next moment, for the next breath, in the silent language of implicit memory, in the wordless wisdom of the subconscious. Before you consciously register danger, before you articulate fear, before you decide how to respond, your subconscious has already assessed the threat, has already flooded your body with adrenaline, has already prepared you to fight or flee or freeze, acting as the silent guardian that has kept your ancestors alive for millions of years. The subconscious is the emotional brain, the limbic system, the ancient circuitry that evolved long before language, long before rational thought, long before the prefrontal cortex developed the capacity for planning, for abstract reasoning, for conscious deliberation. This emotional brain operates on a different timescale than conscious thought, processing information in milliseconds rather than seconds, responding to threats before the conscious mind has time to analyze, to evaluate, to decide. This speed is essential for survival. In a dangerous world, the organism that hesitates, that waits for conscious understanding before acting, is the organism that does not survive. The subconscious does not hesitate. It acts immediately, automatically, drawing on patterns learned over a lifetime, over generations, over the entire evolutionary history of the species. The amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, is the central hub of the emotional subconscious, the alarm system that detects threats, that triggers fear responses, that creates the emotional memories that shape your perception of safety and danger. The amygdala receives sensory information directly from the thalamus, bypassing the cortex, bypassing conscious awareness, allowing it to respond to potential threats before you consciously perceive them. This is the fast pathway, the emergency route, the circuit that allows you to jump back from a snake before you consciously recognize it as a snake, to duck before you consciously see the object flying towards your head, to feel fear before you know what you are afraid of. The amygdala is always scanning, always vigilant, always ready to sound the alarm, to mobilize the body's defenses, to protect you from harm. The emotional responses generated by the amygdala are not subtle, not nuanced, not calibrated to the specific nature of the threat. They are binary, all or nothing, designed for speed rather than accuracy. The amygdala does not distinguish between a real threat and a perceived threat, between a physical danger and a social embarrassment, between a life-threatening situation and a mildly stressful one. It responds to all of them in the same way, with fear, with anxiety, with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, with the release of stress hormones, with the preparation of the body for action. This lack of discrimination is both a strength and a weakness. It ensures that you respond quickly to genuine threats, but it also means that you respond to false alarms, to situations that are not actually dangerous, to stimuli that trigger fear based on past associations rather than present reality. The subconscious emotional system is shaped by experience, by the accumulation of emotional memories, by the associations formed between stimuli and outcomes, between actions and consequences. Every time you experience fear and survive, every time you encounter a threat and escape, every time you feel pain and recover, the subconscious encodes the experience, stores the pattern, updates its model of what is dangerous, what is safe, what requires vigilance, what can be ignored. This learning is rapid, often occurring after a single exposure, particularly when the experience is intense, when the emotion is strong, when the stakes are high. A child who is bitten by a dog may develop a lifelong fear of dogs, even if the bite was minor, even if most dogs are friendly, even if the rational mind knows that the fear is disproportionate. The subconscious does not care about proportionality. It cares about survival, and it errs on the side of caution, encoding the association, triggering the fear, keeping you safe even if it means keeping you limited. The subconscious also regulates positive emotions, not just negative ones, though the negative emotions tend to be more salient, more memorable, more powerful in shaping behavior. The reward system, centered in the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, is the subconscious mechanism that drives motivation, that creates pleasure, that reinforces behaviors that are beneficial, that lead to survival, to reproduction, to the fulfillment of basic needs. When you eat when you are hungry, when you drink when you are thirsty, when you connect with others, when you achieve a goal, the reward system releases dopamine, creating a feeling of pleasure, of satisfaction, of wanting to repeat the behavior. This is the subconscious teaching you what to pursue, what to value, what to seek, using the language of emotion, using the currency of pleasure and pain. The reward system, like the fear system, is not always rational, not always aligned with long-term well-being. It evolved in an environment of scarcity, where calories were hard to come by, where social connection was essential for survival, where immediate rewards were more valuable than distant ones. In the modern environment of abundance, the same system that once drove adaptive behaviors now drives maladaptive ones. Overeating, addiction, compulsive behaviors, the pursuit of short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term health. The subconscious does not know that food is plentiful, that sugar is harmful in excess, that the dopamine hit from social media is not the same as genuine human connection. It responds to the immediate signal, to the pleasure, to the reward, reinforcing the behavior, creating the craving, driving the compulsion. Emotional regulation, the ability to manage emotions, to modulate their intensity, to prevent them from overwhelming consciousness, is largely a subconscious process, mediated by the prefrontal cortex's influence on the limbic system, by the top-down control that allows you to reappraise a situation, to reinterpret a stimulus, to change the emotional response. But this control is limited, effortful, easily disrupted by stress, by fatigue, by alcohol, by anything that impairs prefrontal function. When the prefrontal cortex is offline, the subconscious emotional system takes over, and emotions become more intense, more reactive, more difficult to control. This is why you are more likely to lose your temper when you are tired, more likely to feel anxious when you are stressed, more likely to make impulsive decisions when you are intoxicated. The conscious mind is no longer regulating the subconscious, and the subconscious, left to its own devices, responds to the world with the raw, unfiltered intensity of the emotional brain. The subconscious also protects you through defense mechanisms, through psychological strategies that operate outside of conscious awareness, that shield you from emotional pain, from unbearable truths, from conflicts that would be too destabilizing to confront directly. Repression pushes painful memories out of conscious awareness, storing them in the subconscious where they cannot be accessed, cannot be remembered, cannot cause distress. Denial refuses to acknowledge reality, rejects information that contradicts your self-image, your worldview, your sense of safety. Projection attributes your own unacceptable feelings to others, seeing in them the anger, the jealousy, the desire that you cannot acknowledge in yourself. Rationalization creates logical explanations for behaviors that are actually driven by emotion, by impulse, by the subconscious need to protect the ego, to maintain self-esteem, to avoid shame. These defense mechanisms are not conscious strategies, not deliberate choices, but automatic responses, subconscious processes that activate when the emotional system detects a threat to psychological integrity, to the coherence of the self. They serve a protective function, allowing you to function, to maintain relationships, to engage with the world without being paralyzed by anxiety, by guilt, by the full weight of your own contradictions. But they also have a cost. They distort reality, they prevent growth, they keep you from confronting the issues that need to be addressed. They maintain patterns that are ultimately harmful, that limit your freedom, your authenticity, your capacity for genuine connection. The work of therapy, of self-awareness, of personal development, often involves bringing these subconscious defense mechanisms into conscious awareness, recognizing when they are operating, understanding what they are protecting you from, and gradually developing the capacity to face the underlying emotions, the underlying truths, without needing the defense, without needing the distortion. This is not about eliminating the subconscious, not about overriding it with conscious control, but about creating a partnership, a collaboration, a dialogue between conscious and subconscious, where both can contribute to your well-being, where both can be heard, where both can be integrated into a more complete, more authentic sense of self. The subconscious emotional system is also the source of empathy, of the ability to feel what others are feeling, to resonate with their emotional states, to understand their experience from the inside. Mirror neurons, discovered in the 1990s, are neurons that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action, creating a neural basis for imitation, for learning, for social connection. These neurons also fire in response to observed emotions, allowing you to feel a shadow of what another person is feeling, to experience their joy, their sadness, their fear, as if it were your own. This is the subconscious creating empathy, creating the emotional bridge that connects you to others, that allows for compassion, for understanding, for the social bonds that are essential for human survival. Empathy is not a conscious decision, not a deliberate act of imagination, but an automatic response, a subconscious resonance that occurs before you think about it, before you analyze it, before you decide whether or not to care. When you see someone in pain, your subconscious responds, activates the same neural circuits that would be activated if you were in pain, creates the feeling, the urge to help, the motivation to alleviate suffering. This is the subconscious's moral compass as the foundation of ethics, as the source of the golden rule. Treat others as you would want to be treated, not because it is a logical principle, but because you can feel, at a subconscious level, what it is like to be them, what it would be like to receive the treatment you are considering giving. The subconscious emotional system is also involved in aesthetic experience, in the feeling of beauty, of awe, of transcendence that arises when you encounter art, music, nature, moments of profound meaning. These experiences are not primarily cognitive, not primarily about understanding or analysis, but about feeling, about the emotional response that occurs before interpretation, before categorization, before the conscious mind has time to label, to explain, to reduce the experience to concepts. The subconscious responds to beauty with pleasure, with the sense of rightness, with the activation of reward circuits, with the release of endorphins, with the feeling that you are in the presence of something significant, something that matters, something that connects you to something larger than yourself. The relationship between emotion and memory is bidirectional, mutually reinforcing. Emotional experiences are more likely to be remembered, to be encoded into long-term memory, because the emotional arousal enhances the consolidation process, signals to the brain that this experience is important, that it should be stored, that it should be available for future reference. This is why you remember your first kiss, your first heartbreak, the day you graduated, the moment you heard devastating news. The emotion tags the memory, makes it vivid, makes it durable, makes it accessible. Conversely, memories can trigger emotions, can bring back the feelings associated with past experiences, can make you feel joy or sadness or fear in response to a stimulus that is not inherently emotional, but that is connected through memory to an emotional event. This is the subconscious linking past and present, using emotion as the thread that weaves together the narrative of your life. The subconscious emotional system operates continuously, even during sleep, processing the emotional content of the day, integrating emotional memories, regulating mood, preparing you for the emotional challenges of tomorrow. Dreams, as discussed in the previous chapter, are one manifestation of this process, but the emotional work of the subconscious extends beyond dreaming, beyond REM sleep, into the deeper stages of sleep, into the quiet restorative phases where the brain is consolidating, repairing, resetting. The quality of your sleep affects the quality of your emotional regulation, affects your resilience, affects your capacity to handle stress, to maintain equilibrium, to respond to challenges with flexibility rather than rigidity, with calm rather than panic. The subconscious is not infallible, not always accurate, not always adaptive. It can be biased, can be shaped by trauma, can be conditioned by experiences that are no longer relevant, can respond to the modern world with strategies that evolve for a different environment, a different set of challenges. But it is also wise, deeply wise, in ways that the conscious mind is not. It has access to information that consciousness cannot process, to patterns that are too subtle, too complex, too numerous to be consciously articulated. It has been shaped by millions of years of evolution, by countless generations of ancestors who survived, who adapted, who passed on their genes, their strategies, their subconscious wisdom. Trusting the subconscious does not mean abandoning conscious thought, does not mean surrendering to impulse, but it does mean listening, paying attention, honoring the feelings, the intuitions, the bodily sensations that arise from the emotional depths that carry information that deserve to be heard. And as you rest now, as you feel the gentle rhythm of your breath, as you allow the tensions of the day to dissolve, you can trust that your subconscious is watching over you, is processing the emotions you have felt, is integrating the experiences you have had, is preparing you to face tomorrow with resilience, with balance, with the quiet strength that comes from knowing that you are protected, that you are held, that you are guided by an intelligence that is older than words, deeper than thought, wiser than you can consciously comprehend. The guardian is always there, always vigilant, always working in the silence, in the depths, in the unseen spaces where emotion is born, where safety is created, where the self is protected. The most elegant solutions, the most creative insights, the most profound breakthroughs often arrive not through conscious effort, not through deliberate analysis, but in moments of rest, in the quiet spaces between thoughts, when the subconscious is free to work without interference, to make connections that consciousness cannot see, to solve problems that logic cannot crack. The incubation effect is the phenomenon by which stepping away from a problem, by ceasing to consciously work on it, by allowing it to rest in the subconscious, leads to better solutions, to more creative insights, to sudden moments of clarity that seem to come from nowhere. This is not procrastination, not avoidance, not laziness, but a fundamental feature of how the subconscious processes information, how it approaches problems differently than the conscious mind, how it needs time, needs space, needs freedom from conscious interference to do its best work. The incubation effect has been documented across domains, in mathematics, in science, in art, in everyday problem solving, and it reveals that the subconscious is not passive, not idle, not waiting for instructions, but actively working, actively processing, actively searching for solutions even when you are not consciously thinking about the problem. The mechanism of incubation involves several processes, all occurring at the subconscious level, all operating outside of conscious awareness. One process is the spreading activation of semantic networks, the way that concepts in memory are connected to related concepts, forming webs of association that extend far beyond what can be held in conscious attention at any given moment. When you consciously work on a problem, you activate certain nodes in this network, certain concepts, certain associations, and these activations spread, ripple outward, activating related concepts, related memories, related patterns. But conscious attention is limited, can only hold a few items at a time, can only follow a few pathways, can only explore a small portion of the network. When you stop consciously working on the problem, when you allow the subconscious to take over, the spreading activation continues, but now it is free to explore more widely, to follow pathways that conscious attention would have ignored, to make connections that seem irrelevant, that seem tangential, that turn out to be exactly what is needed. Another process involved in incubation is the relaxation of mental fixation, the release of the assumptions, the constraints, the habitual patterns of thought that can prevent you from seeing a problem in a new way. When you work on a problem consciously, you tend to approach it with certain assumptions, certain methods, certain strategies that have worked in the past, that feel familiar, that feel safe. These assumptions can be helpful, can guide you toward a solution, but they can also be limiting, can create blind spots, can prevent you from considering alternatives, from thinking outside the box, from seeing the problem from a different angle. The subconscious is not bound by these assumptions, not constrained by these habits, and when you step away from the problem, when you allow the conscious fixation to relax, the subconscious is free to explore unconventional solutions, to consider possibilities that the conscious mind would have rejected, to approach the problem with fresh eyes. With beginner's mind, with the openness that is essential for creativity. Sleep is one of the most powerful contexts for incubation, for allowing the subconscious to work on problems without conscious interference. During sleep, particularly during REM sleep, the brain is highly active, processing information, consolidating memories, making connections, but the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with logical reasoning and executive control, is relatively quiet. This creates a unique state where the associative networks are active, where the creative processes are engaged, but where the constraints of logic, of realism, of conventional thinking are relaxed. This is why dreams are often bizarre, why they violate the rules of waking reality, why they combine elements in ways that seem nonsensical. The subconscious is exploring, is experimenting, is making connections, without the interference of conscious judgment, without the need to make sense, without the requirement to be realistic. The history of science and art is filled with examples of problems solved during sleep, of insights that arrived in dreams, of breakthroughs that occurred when the conscious mind was offline and the subconscious was free to work. Dmitri Mendeleev saw the periodic table in a dream, the elements arranging themselves in the pattern that would revolutionize chemistry. Auguste Kekulé discovered the ring structure of benzene after dreaming of a snake biting its own tail, an image that captured the circular structure that had eluded him during waking hours. Elias Howe, the inventor of the sewing machine, solved the problem of the needle design after dreaming of spears with holes near the tips, an image that translated directly into the solution he had been seeking. These are not coincidences, not flukes, but examples of the subconscious doing what it does best, making connections, seeing patterns, solving problems in ways that the conscious mind cannot. The incubation effect is not limited to sleep, not limited to dreams, but occurs in any state where conscious attention is diverted, where the mind is allowed to wander, where the subconscious is given space to work. Walking, showering, driving, doing routine tasks. These are all contexts where people report having sudden insights, sudden solutions, sudden moments of clarity. The common feature is that conscious attention is occupied with something simple, something automatic, something that does not require deep thought, and this frees the subconscious to work in the background, to continue processing the problem, to make the connections that lead to the solution. This is why taking a break, why stepping away from a difficult problem, why doing something completely different can be more productive than continuing to struggle, than forcing yourself to think harder, than trying to solve the problem through sheer conscious effort. The subconscious approaches problems holistically, seeing the big picture, seeing the relationships between elements, seeing the patterns that emerge when you step back, when you stop focusing on the details, when you allow the whole to reveal itself. The conscious mind tends to approach problems analytically, breaking them down into parts, examining each part separately, solving each subproblem in sequence. This approach is effective for certain types of problems, for problems that are well defined, that have clear steps, that can be solved through logical deduction. But many problems are not like this. Many problems are ill-defined, ambiguous, complex, requiring insight rather than analysis, requiring the ability to see connections that are not obvious, to recognize patterns that are not explicit, to synthesize information from different domains, from different levels of abstraction. These are the problems that benefit from incubation, from the subconscious approach, from the holistic, integrative, pattern-recognizing capacity of the subconscious mind. The incubation effect is enhanced by the initial conscious work on the problem, by the effort to understand it, to define it, to explore possible solutions. This conscious work primes the subconscious, activates the relevant networks, sets the stage for the subconscious processing that will occur during the incubation period. Without this initial work, the subconscious has nothing to work with, no problem to solve, no connections to make. But with the initial work, with the conscious engagement, the subconscious has a starting point, has a direction, has a goal, and it can begin the process of exploration, of connection making, of pattern recognition that will eventually lead to the solution. The conscious and subconscious are not competitors but collaborators, each contributing what it does best, each supporting the other, each necessary for the full range of human problem-solving capacity. The quality of the incubation period matters. Not all breaks are equally effective. Not all forms of rest support the subconscious equally well. Activities that are relaxing, that are enjoyable, that allow the mind to wander, are more conducive to incubation than activities that are stressful, that are demanding, that require focused attention. Sleep is particularly effective because it provides the deepest form of rest, the most complete disengagement from conscious effort, the most freedom for the subconscious to work without interference. But even brief periods of rest, even a few minutes of closing your eyes, of taking a walk, of doing something that allows your mind to drift, can be enough to trigger the incubation effect, to allow the subconscious to make the connection, to deliver the insight, to solve the problem. The experience of the solution arriving, the moment of insight, the aha moment, is often sudden, unexpected, accompanied by a feeling of certainty, of rightness, of knowing that this is the answer. This feeling is the subconscious communicating with consciousness, delivering the result of its work, presenting the solution that it has found. The solution often feels obvious in retrospect, feels like it should have been apparent all along, but this is because the subconscious has done the work of making the connections, of seeing the pattern, of integrating the information. And now that the solution is in consciousness, the conscious mind can see it, can understand it, can recognize its validity. The difficulty was not in understanding the solution, but in finding it, in making the connections, in seeing the pattern. And this is what the subconscious does. This is its gift. This is its contribution to the problem-solving process. The incubation effect is not guaranteed, not automatic, not something you can force or control. Sometimes the subconscious finds the solution. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes the insight arrives quickly. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, months. Sometimes the solution is complete, fully formed, ready to implement. Sometimes it is partial, a hint, a direction, a piece of the puzzle that still requires conscious work to complete. The subconscious is not a magic wand, not a shortcut, not a replacement for conscious effort, but it is a powerful ally, a valuable resource, a source of creativity and insight that can be cultivated, that can be trusted, that can be integrated into your approach to problem solving, to learning, to living. Cultivating the incubation effect requires a shift in mindset, a willingness to step back, to let go, to trust that the subconscious is working even when you are not consciously thinking about the problem. It requires patience, requires tolerance for uncertainty, requires the ability to resist the urge to force a solution, to keep pushing, to keep trying harder. It requires creating space for rest, for relaxation, for activities that allow the mind to wander, that support the subconscious, that give it the freedom it needs to work. It requires paying attention to the insights that arise, to the hunches, to the intuitions, to the sudden thoughts that seem to come from nowhere, recognizing them as messages from the subconscious, as the fruits of the incubation process, as the solutions that have been gestating in the depths, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And as you rest now, as you allow your conscious mind to quiet, as you feel yourself drifting towards sleep, you can trust that your subconscious is ready, is willing, is capable of working on whatever problems you have been carrying, whatever questions you have been asking, whatever challenges you have been facing. You do not need to tell it what to do. Do not need to direct it. Do not need to control it. You only need to let go, to rest, to allow the incubation to occur, to trust that when you wake, you may find that the solution has arrived, that the insight has emerged, that the subconscious has done its work, quietly, invisibly, perfectly, in the silence of the night, in the depths of sleep, in the space where problems dissolve and solutions are born. In the fraction of a second before conscious thought forms, before you can articulate why, before you can explain the reasoning, your subconscious has already recognized the pattern, has already assessed the situation, has already delivered a judgment that feels like instinct, like gut feeling, like a knowing that bypasses logic and arrives fully formed in your awareness. Intuition is not magic, not mysticism, not a sixth sense disconnected from biology. It is pattern recognition, rapid and subconscious, drawing on the vast database of experiences stored in implicit memory, comparing the current situation to thousands of previous situations, identifying similarities, detecting anomalies, making predictions about what will happen next, all in the time it takes to blink, all without conscious awareness of the process. The subconscious is a pattern recognition machine, evolved over millions of years to detect regularities in the environment, to predict outcomes, to guide behavior in ways that increase survival, that reduce threat, that maximize opportunity. This capacity for rapid pattern recognition is the foundation of expertise, the source of snap judgments, the mechanism behind the feeling that you just know something without knowing how you know. The human brain is wired for pattern recognition from birth. From the earliest moments of life, infants recognize faces, distinguish their mother's voice from other voices, detect patterns in language, in music, in the visual world, long before they have the cognitive capacity for conscious analysis, for deliberate reasoning, for verbal thought. This early pattern recognition is entirely subconscious, mediated by neural circuits that are specialized for detecting regularities, for extracting structure from chaos, for finding order in the overwhelming flood of sensory information that enters the brain every moment. As you develop, as you accumulate experience, these pattern recognition systems become more sophisticated, more nuanced, more capable of detecting subtle patterns, complex patterns, patterns that span multiple domains, multiple levels of abstraction. Expertise is largely a matter of pattern recognition, of having encountered so many examples, so many variations, so many instances of a particular domain, that the subconscious has built a rich, detailed, highly organized database of patterns, of configurations, of relationships. A chess grandmaster can look at a board for a few seconds and know the best move, not through conscious calculation of all possible sequences, not through deliberate analysis of each piece, but through pattern recognition, through the subconscious matching the current board position to thousands of positions seen before, to patterns that have been encoded through years of study, years of play, years of immersion in the game. The grandmaster's conscious mind may not know why the move is best, may not be able to articulate the reasoning, but the subconscious knows, and it delivers the answer with a feeling of certainty, with the intuition that this is right. The same process occurs in every domain of expertise. A radiologist can glance at an X-ray and detect an abnormality that a novice would miss, not through conscious analysis of every pixel, not through deliberate comparison to textbook images, but through pattern recognition, through the subconscious detecting the subtle deviation from normal, the configuration that signals disease, the pattern that has been seen before in other cases. A musician can hear a wrong note in a complex piece of music, can feel the dissonance before consciously identifying which note is wrong, because the subconscious has internalized the patterns of harmony, of melody, of rhythm, and it detects the violation automatically, immediately, without conscious effort. A firefighter can sense when a building is about to collapse, can feel the danger before there are obvious signs, because the subconscious has learned the patterns of structural failure, the subtle cues that precede catastrophe, the configurations that signal imminent threat. This expertise-based intuition is not infallible, not always accurate, but it is remarkably reliable when the expert is operating within their domain, when the patterns are familiar, when the subconscious has sufficient data to make accurate predictions. The errors occur when the situation is novel, when the patterns are misleading, when the subconscious matches the current situation to a previous pattern that is similar but not identical, leading to a false positive, to a judgment that feels certain but is wrong. This is why experts can make mistakes, why intuition can fail, why the feeling of knowing is not always a guarantee of accuracy. The subconscious is doing its best with the information it has, with the patterns it has learned, but it is not omniscient, not immune to error, not a perfect predictor of reality. Pattern recognition also underlies social intuition, the ability to read people, to sense their emotions, to predict their behavior, to navigate the complex social world with a fluency that seems effortless, but is actually the result of years of subconscious learning, of pattern extraction, of implicit knowledge about human nature. When you meet someone and instantly feel that you can trust them, or that you should be cautious, that is your subconscious recognizing patterns in their facial expressions, their body language, their tone of voice, their micro-expressions, and comparing these patterns to the patterns of trustworthy and untrustworthy people you have encountered before. The conscious mind may not be able to articulate what it is about the person that triggers the feeling, may not be able to point to specific cues, but the subconscious has detected the pattern, has made the assessment, has delivered the intuition. The accuracy of social intuition varies widely between individuals, depending on their experience, their sensitivity to social cues, their ability to read emotions, their history of social interactions. People who have grown up in environments where reading social cues was essential for safety, for navigating complex family dynamics, for avoiding conflict, often develop highly attuned social intuition, can sense subtle shifts in mood, can detect deception, can predict how others will react, all through subconscious pattern recognition. This is not a special gift, but a learned skill, a capacity that has been developed through experience, through exposure to patterns, through the subconscious encoding of social information over thousands of interactions. The subconscious uses pattern recognition not only to understand the present, but to predict the future, to anticipate what will happen next, to prepare the body and mind for upcoming events. This predictive capacity is essential for smooth, coordinated action, for interacting with a dynamic environment, for responding to changes before they fully occur. When you catch a ball, your subconscious is predicting the trajectory, is calculating where the ball will be, is moving your hand to that location before the ball arrives. When you have a conversation, your subconscious is predicting what the other person will say, is preparing your response, is anticipating the flow of the dialogue. When you drive, your subconscious is predicting the behavior of other drivers, is anticipating hazards, is preparing to brake, to swerve, to react, all before conscious thought has time to process the situation. This predictive capacity is based on patterns learned from experience, on regularities extracted from the past, on the assumption that the future will resemble the past, that the patterns that have held before will hold again. This assumption is usually correct, usually adaptive, usually allows for efficient, effective action. But it can also lead to errors, to predictions that are wrong, to expectations that are violated, to the experience of surprise when reality does not match the prediction. Surprise is the signal that the pattern has been violated, that the prediction was wrong, that the subconscious needs to update its model, to revise its expectations, to learn a new pattern. The brain responds to surprise with increased attention, with heightened arousal, with the activation of learning mechanisms, because surprise indicates that there is new information, that the environment has changed, that the old patterns may no longer be reliable. The subconscious also recognizes patterns in your own behavior, in your own thoughts, in your own emotional responses, creating a sense of self, a sense of continuity, a sense of being the same person over time despite the constant flux of experience, despite the changes in your body, your beliefs, your circumstances. This self-pattern is not fixed, not static, but dynamic, constantly updated, constantly revised, constantly integrating new experiences, new information, new aspects of who you are. The subconscious maintains this pattern, uses it to predict your own behavior, to anticipate your own reactions, to create the feeling of familiarity, of recognizing yourself, of knowing who you are. When you act out of character, when you surprise yourself, when you do something that does not fit the pattern, The subconscious registers the discrepancy, creates a feeling of dissonance, of unfamiliarity, of questioning. And this can be uncomfortable, can be destabilizing, can trigger a process of self-reflection, of integration, of updating the self-pattern to include this new information. Pattern recognition is also the basis of aesthetic preference, of the sense of beauty, of the feeling that certain forms, certain proportions, certain configurations are pleasing, are harmonious, are right. The subconscious recognizes patterns in art, in music, in nature, patterns that resonate with deep structures in the brain, with the way the visual system is organized, with the way the auditory system processes sound, with the patterns that have been associated with safety, with fertility, with health, with the environments in which humans evolved. The golden ratio, the symmetry of faces, the fractal patterns of trees and coastlines, the harmonic relationships in music, these are patterns that the subconscious recognizes, that it responds to with pleasure, with a sense of rightness, with the activation of reward circuits, with the feeling that this is beautiful, that this matters, that this is worth attending to. The development of artificial intelligence, particularly machine learning, has been largely an attempt to replicate the pattern recognition capacity of the subconscious, to create systems that can learn from data, that can extract regularities, that can make predictions, that can recognize faces, understand language, play games, drive cars. These systems are remarkably successful in narrow domains, in tasks where the patterns are clear, where the data is abundant, where the rules are consistent. But they still fall short of the flexibility, the generalizability, the robustness of human pattern recognition, of the subconscious capacity to learn from limited data, to transfer knowledge across domains, to adapt to novel situations, to recognize patterns that are subtle, ambiguous, context-dependent. The subconscious remains, for now, the most sophisticated pattern recognition system we know, the product of millions of years of evolution, of countless generations of learning, of the relentless pressure of natural selection to detect patterns, to predict outcomes, to survive. The cultivation of intuition, the development of pattern recognition capacity, requires exposure to patterns, requires experience, requires immersion in a domain, requires the accumulation of examples that the subconscious can encode, can organize, can use to build its database. This is why expertise takes time, why mastery requires years of practice, why there are no shortcuts to developing deep intuition. The subconscious needs data, needs repetition, needs variation, needs the opportunity to encounter the same patterns in different contexts, to see the regularities, to extract the structure, to build the implicit knowledge that will support rapid, accurate, intuitive judgments. The conscious mind can accelerate this process by directing attention, by seeking out diverse experiences, by reflecting on patterns, by making the implicit explicit, but the fundamental work is done by the subconscious, by the slow, gradual, cumulative process of pattern extraction, of learning, of integration. Trusting your intuition requires discernment, requires knowing when the subconscious has sufficient data, when the patterns are reliable, when the domain is familiar. Intuition is most trustworthy when you are operating within your area of expertise, when you have extensive experience, when the situation resembles situations you have encountered before. Intuition is least trustworthy when you are in unfamiliar territory, when the patterns are novel, when the subconscious is extrapolating beyond its database, when it is making predictions based on insufficient information. The key is to recognize the difference, to know when to trust the gut feeling and when to engage conscious analysis, when to rely on pattern recognition and when to gather more data, when to act on intuition and when to deliberate, to question, to verify. And as you rest now, as you allow your mind to settle, as you feel the gentle pull of sleep, you can trust that your subconscious is continuing its work, is continuing to recognize patterns, to extract regularities, to build the database that will support your intuition, your expertise, your capacity to navigate the world with grace, with confidence, with a quiet knowing that comes from deep, implicit, subconscious understanding. The patterns are there, waiting to be recognized, waiting to reveal themselves, waiting to guide you, and your subconscious is always watching, always learning, always ready to deliver the insight, the judgment, the intuition that will serve you, that will protect you, that will help you thrive. The person you are today, the actions you take without thinking, the responses that feel automatic, the patterns that define your daily life, these are not the result of conscious choice in each moment, but the accumulated weight of neural pathways carved deep through repetition, through the subconscious automation of behaviors that have been practiced so many times they've become part of the architecture of your brain. Habits are the subconscious made visible, the invisible patterns of neural activity, translated into observable behavior, the evidence that the brain is not static but plastic, constantly reshaping itself in response to experience, constantly encoding the patterns you repeat, constantly automating the actions you perform, freeing conscious attention for new challenges, for new learning, for the exploration of the unfamiliar. Every habit you have, from the way you brush your teeth, to the route you take to work, from the foods you crave to the thoughts you think when you are stressed, is a neural pathway, a sequence of neurons that fire together, that have wired together, that have become so strongly connected that activating the first neuron in the sequence automatically activates the rest, creating a cascade, a chain reaction, a program that runs to completion without conscious oversight. The formation of a habit follows a predictable pattern, a three-stage process that neuroscientists call the habit loop. First, there is a cue, a trigger, a stimulus in the environment or in your internal state that signals the brain to initiate the habitual behavior. The cue can be a time of day, a location, an emotional state, the presence of other people, a preceding action, anything that consistently precedes the behavior, that becomes associated with it, that tells the subconscious now is the time to execute this routine. Second, there is the routine itself, the behavior, the sequence of actions that constitutes the habit, the motor program that has been encoded through repetition, that runs automatically once triggered. Third, there is the reward, the positive outcome, the feeling of satisfaction, the release of dopamine, the reinforcement that tells the brain, this was good, this was useful, remember this pattern, strengthen this connection, make this easier to execute next time. The basal ganglia, a cluster of structures deep in the brain, is the primary neural substrate of habit formation, the region where the habit loop is encoded, where the associations between cue, routine, and reward are stored, where the automation occurs. When you first learn a new behavior, when you consciously practice a new skill, the prefrontal cortex is highly active, directing attention, monitoring performance, making adjustments, exerting executive control. But as the behavior is repeated, as the pattern becomes familiar, as the associations strengthen, activity gradually shifts from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, from conscious control to automatic execution, from effortful to effortless. This shift is the hallmark of habit formation, the neural signature of the transition from learning to mastery, from deliberate practice to automatic performance. The power of habits lies in their efficiency, in their ability to conserve mental energy, to reduce the cognitive load of daily life, to allow you to function without constant conscious deliberation. Imagine if you had to consciously think about every action, every movement, every decision, from the moment you woke up to the moment you went to sleep. You would be exhausted within hours, overwhelmed by the sheer number of choices, paralyzed by the need to analyze every option, unable to function. Habits solve this problem by automating the routine, the predictable, the repetitive, creating a stable foundation of automatic behaviors that support conscious thought, that free attention for the novel, the complex, the important. This is why successful people often have strong morning routines, why athletes have pre-performance rituals, why writers have daily writing habits. The automation of the routine creates space for creativity, for focus, for the work that requires conscious effort. But the efficiency of habits is also their danger, their limitation, their potential to trap you in patterns that no longer serve you, that were adaptive in one context, but are maladaptive in another, that were formed unconsciously and now operate unconsciously, shaping your life in ways you do not recognize, do not intend, do not want. Habits are neutral, neither good nor bad in themselves, but their effects are not neutral. A habit of exercise supports health, a habit of smoking destroys it, a habit of gratitude enhances well-being, a habit of rumination undermines it, a habit of deep work builds mastery, a habit of distraction prevents it. The subconscious does not distinguish between beneficial and harmful habits, does not evaluate their long-term consequences, does not judge their morality or their wisdom. It simply encodes the pattern, strengthens the connection, automates the behavior based on the immediate reward, the dopamine hit, the feeling of satisfaction that follows the routine. Changing a habit is difficult precisely because it is subconscious, because it is automatic, because it operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, triggering and executing before you realize what is happening. The cue appears, the routine begins, the reward is delivered, and only afterward, if at all, does the conscious mind recognize that the habit has occurred, that the pattern has repeated, that the unwanted behavior has happened again. This is the frustration of habit change, the reason why willpower alone is often insufficient, why conscious intention is not enough, why you can genuinely want to change and yet find yourself repeating the same pattern, falling into the same routine, experiencing the same outcome. The subconscious is stronger than consciousness. The automatic is more powerful than the deliberate. The habit is more deeply encoded than the intention. The key to changing a habit is not to fight the subconscious, not to try to overpower it with willpower, not to rely on conscious control to override the automatic, but to work with the subconscious, to understand the habit loop, to identify the routine, to preserve the reward. This is the insight of habit research, the practical wisdom that has emerged from decades of studying how habits form, how they persist, how they can be changed. You cannot eliminate a habit by willpower alone, but you can replace it, can substitute a new routine for the old one, can keep the same cue and the same reward, but change the behavior in between. The subconscious does not care what the routine is, only that it leads to the reward, only that the pattern is consistent, only that the cue reliably predicts the outcome. The process of habit replacement requires awareness, requires identifying the cue that triggers the unwanted behavior, requires recognizing the reward that reinforces it, requires experimenting with alternative routines that provide the same reward, that satisfy the same need, that fit into the same cue routine reward loop. If you have a habit of snacking when you are stressed, the cue is the feeling of stress. The routine is eating. The reward is the temporary relief, the distraction, the comfort that food provides. To change the habit, you need to identify a different routine that provides the same reward, perhaps going for a walk, calling a friend, doing breathing exercises, engaging in any behavior that relieves stress, that provides comfort, that can be triggered by the same cue and lead to the same reward. The subconscious will accept the substitution if the new routine is practiced consistently, if it reliably delivers the reward, if it becomes associated with the cue through repetition. The environment plays a crucial role in habit formation and habit change, serving as the source of cues, as the context in which routines are executed, as the framework that supports or undermines your intentions. Habits are context dependent. triggered by specific environments, specific situations, specific configurations of stimuli. This is why it is easier to maintain healthy habits when you're in a supportive environment, when the cues for healthy behaviors are abundant, when the cues for unhealthy behaviors are absent. This is why changing your environment can be more effective than changing your willpower, why removing temptations is more reliable than resisting them, why designing your space to support your goals is a form of self-compassion, a recognition that the subconscious is influenced by context, that habits are shaped by environment, that you can change your behavior by changing your surroundings. The concept of keystone habits introduced by Charles Duhigg in The Power of Habit refers to habits that have a cascading effect, that trigger other positive changes, that create a ripple of transformation across multiple domains of life. Exercise is often a keystone habit. People who start exercising regularly often find that they also start eating better, sleeping better, managing stress better, not because they consciously decided to change all these behaviors, but because the habit of exercise creates a shift in identity, in self-perception, in the subconscious sense of who you are. And this shift influences other behaviors, creates momentum, makes other positive changes easier, more natural, more aligned with the new self-image. The subconscious is not a collection of isolated habits, but an integrated system, and changing one part of the system can influence the whole, can create a cascade of positive change that extends far beyond the original habit. The role of identity in habit formation is profound, often overlooked, but essential for understanding why some habits stick and others do not, why some changes are sustainable and others are temporary. Habits are not just behaviors, but expressions of identity, reflections of who you believe you are, manifestations of the self-concept that the subconscious maintains, that guides behavior, that shapes choices. When you identify as a runner, the habit of running is not a chore, not a discipline, not something you have to force yourself to do, but a natural expression of who you are, something that feels right, that feels consistent with your sense of self. When you identify as a non-smoker, the habit of not smoking is not a constant struggle, not a daily battle of willpower, but a simple fact, a reflection of your identity, something that does not require effort because it is who you are. Changing identity is not a matter of conscious declaration, not a matter of simply deciding to be different, but a gradual process, accumulation of evidence, a collection of small actions that demonstrate to the subconscious that you are becoming someone new, that the old identity is no longer accurate, that the new identity is emerging. Every time you act in accordance with the new identity, every time you choose the behavior that aligns with who you want to be, you are providing evidence, you are updating the self-concept, you are teaching the subconscious that this is who you are now. The change is not instantaneous but cumulative, not dramatic but incremental, not a single moment of transformation but 1,000 small moments, 1,000 small choices, 1,000 repetitions that gradually shift the identity, that gradually change the habits, that gradually create the person you are becoming. The subconscious is always learning, always encoding, always automating, and this means that you are always forming habits, whether you intend to or not, whether you are aware of it or not. Every repeated behavior is a potential habit. Every consistent pattern is being encoded. This is both empowering and sobering. Empowering because it means you can deliberately create habits, can intentionally design your life, can consciously choose the patterns you want to automate. Sobering because it means you are also unconsciously creating habits, passively absorbing patterns, automatically encoding behaviors that you may not want, that may not serve you, that may be shaping your life in ways you do not recognize. The practice of mindfulness, of bringing conscious awareness to automatic behaviors, is a powerful tool for understanding habits, for recognizing the cues, for observing the routines, for noticing the rewards, for creating the space between stimulus and response where choice becomes possible. Mindfulness does not eliminate habits, does not override the subconscious, but it creates awareness, creates the opportunity to see the pattern, to recognize the automation, to decide whether to continue the routine or to choose a different response. This awareness is the first step in habit change, the necessary foundation for working with the subconscious, for replacing unwanted patterns, for creating new routines that align with your values, your goals, your vision of who you want to become. And as you rest now, as you allow your body to relax, as you feel the day's tensions dissolving, you can reflect on the habits that shape your life, on the patterns that have been automated, on the neural pathways that have been carved through repetition. You can trust that the subconscious is ready to learn, ready to encode new patterns, ready to automate new behaviors. If you provide the repetition, if you create the consistency, if you work with the habit loop rather than against it. The power to change is not in forcing, not in fighting, not in willpower alone, but in understanding, in awareness, in the gentle, patient, persistent practice of choosing again and again the behavior that aligns with who you are becoming, until the subconscious accepts it, encodes it, automates it, and it becomes effortlessly who you are. Beneath the personal memories, beneath the individual experiences, beneath the unique patterns that define your particular subconscious, there may exist a deeper layer, a shared substrate of human psychology, a collective unconscious that connects you to every person who has ever lived, to the accumulated wisdom of the species, to patterns that are not learned but inherited, not personal but universal. Carl Jung proposed the concept of the collective unconscious in the early 20th century, suggesting that in addition to the personal unconscious, the repository of your individual experiences, your forgotten memories, your repressed emotions, there exists a deeper level of the psyche that is shared across all humans, that contains archetypes, universal patterns of thought and behavior that are inherited, that are part of the structure of the human mind itself, that manifest across cultures, across time periods, across individuals who have no direct contact with one another. Jung observed that certain symbols, certain myths, certain characters appear repeatedly in the dreams, the stories, the religions of cultures around the world. The hero, the mother, the shadow, the wise old man, the trickster. And he argued that these are not coincidences, not independent inventions, but expressions of archetypes, of patterns that are built into the collective unconscious, that are part of the shared inheritance of humanity. The evidence for the collective unconscious is not empirical in the traditional scientific sense, not based on controlled experiments, not measurable through brain imaging or behavioral testing, but phenomenological based on the observation of patterns, of similarities, of resonances that appear across cultures, across individuals, across contexts that should be independent if the patterns were purely learned, purely cultural, purely individual. The hero's journey described by Joseph Campbell in The Hero with 1,000 Faces is a narrative pattern that appears in myths and stories from every culture, the call to adventure, the crossing of the threshold, the trials and challenges, the transformation, the return with the gift. This pattern is not taught, not consciously transmitted, but seems to emerge spontaneously, seems to resonate with something deep in the human psyche, seems to reflect a universal structure of psychological development, of the journey from innocence to experience, from dependence to autonomy, from unconsciousness to consciousness. Whether the collective unconscious exists as Jung described it, whether archetypes are inherited patterns or learned patterns that are so universal, so fundamental to human experience that they appear to be innate, is a question that remains open. That continues to be debated, that may not be resolvable with current scientific methods. But the phenomenology is undeniable. The patterns exist, the symbols recur, the myths resonate, and they speak to something in the subconscious, to a level of meaning that is deeper than personal experience. That connects individual psychology to the broader human story, to the collective journey of the species. Engaging with archetypes, with myths, with symbols, can be a way of accessing this deeper level, of connecting with the collective, of finding meaning that transcends the personal, that places your individual life in the context of the universal, the timeless, the eternal. The shadow, one of Jung's most important archetypes, represents the parts of yourself that you do not acknowledge, that you reject, that you project onto others, the aspects of your personality that are incompatible with your self-image, with your ego, with the persona you present to the world. The shadow contains not only negative qualities, anger, jealousy, selfishness, aggression, but also positive qualities that have been suppressed, that have been deemed unacceptable, that have been pushed into the unconscious because they do not fit the role you have been assigned, the identity you have constructed, the expectations you are trying to meet. The work of shadow integration, of bringing these rejected parts into consciousness, of acknowledging them, accepting them, integrating them into a more complete sense of self, is one of the central tasks of psychological development, of individuation, of becoming whole. The subconscious holds the shadow, protects it, keeps it hidden, but also signals its presence through dreams, through slips of the tongue, through the qualities you most despise in others, through the emotional reactions that seem disproportionate, that reveal the presence of something unacknowledged, something that needs to be seen, to be felt, to be integrated. The anima and animus, the feminine aspect in men and the masculine aspect in women, are archetypes that represent the contrasexual elements of the psyche, the qualities that are culturally associated with the opposite gender, but that exist in everyone, that need to be recognized, developed, integrated for psychological wholeness. In a culture that rigidly defines gender roles, that assigns certain qualities to men and others to women, the contrasexual aspects are often repressed, pushed into the unconscious, experienced as foreign, as other, as something to be projected onto romantic partners rather than owned as part of the self. The integration of the anima, or animus, is the recognition that you contain both masculine and feminine qualities, that wholeness requires the development of both, that the subconscious holds these qualities, waiting for you to acknowledge them, to claim them, to bring them into conscious expression. The self, in Jungian psychology, is the archetype of wholeness, of integration, of the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, ego and shadow, masculine and feminine. The self is not the ego, not the conscious sense of I, but something larger, something that encompasses the ego, that includes the unconscious, that represents the potential for full psychological development, for individuation, for becoming who you truly are. The journey toward the self is the journey of a lifetime, a gradual process of bringing the unconscious into consciousness, of integrating the shadow, of balancing the opposites, of moving from identification with the ego to alignment with the self. The subconscious is the realm where this journey occurs, where the archetypes reside, where the transformation happens, where the self is gradually revealed, gradually realized, gradually embodied. Modern neuroscience has not confirmed the existence of the collective unconscious, has not found a neural substrate for archetypes, has not provided empirical evidence for Jung's theories in the way that it has for other aspects of the subconscious. But neuroscience has revealed that the brain is not a blank slate, that it comes equipped with innate structures, with predispositions, with biases that shape perception, that guide learning, that influence behavior. The brain is wired for language, for face recognition, for pattern recognition, for emotional responses, and these innate structures create commonalities across humans, create universal aspects of psychology, create the foundation for what might be called archetypal patterns, whether or not they are inherited in the way Jung proposed. The future of subconscious research lies at the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, artificial intelligence, and contemplative practice in the integration of objective measurement and subjective experience, of third-person observation and first-person exploration. Neuroscience is mapping the brain, identifying the circuits, the chemicals, the oscillations that underlie subconscious processes, providing a biological foundation for understanding how the subconscious works, how it learns, how it influences behavior. Psychology is exploring the phenomenology, the subjective experience, the patterns of thought and emotion that characterize the subconscious, providing a descriptive framework for understanding what the subconscious does, how it manifests, how it can be engaged. Artificial intelligence is attempting to replicate subconscious processes to create systems that learn, that recognize patterns, that make decisions without explicit programming, providing insights into the computational principles that might underlie subconscious function. Contemplative practices, meditation, mindfulness, introspection, dream work, provide direct access to the subconscious, create the conditions for observing it, for experiencing it, for learning from it in ways that are not mediated by theory, by measurement, by external observation. These practices have been refined over thousands of years, across multiple traditions, across cultures that had no contact with one another, suggesting that they tap into something fundamental about human psychology, about the structure of consciousness, about the relationship between conscious and subconscious. The integration of contemplative practice with scientific research is one of the most promising developments in the study of the subconscious, creating a dialogue between ancient wisdom and modern science, between subjective experience and objective measurement, between the inner exploration of the meditator and the external observation of the neuroscientist. The potential applications of subconscious research are vast, extending into education, therapy, performance enhancement, creativity, decision-making, personal development. Understanding how the subconscious learns could revolutionize education, could lead to teaching methods that work with the subconscious rather than against it, that leverage implicit learning, that create conditions for deep encoding, for lasting retention, for the transfer of knowledge from conscious effort to subconscious competence. Understanding how the subconscious processes emotion could transform therapy, could lead to more effective treatments for trauma, for anxiety, for depression, for the emotional wounds that are stored in the body, in implicit memory, in the subconscious patterns that shape behavior, that limit freedom, that prevent healing. Understanding how the subconscious recognizes patterns could enhance performance in every domain, could accelerate the development of expertise, could improve decision-making, could support the cultivation of intuition, of the rapid, accurate judgments that characterize mastery. Understanding how the subconscious generates creativity could unlock new approaches to innovation, to problem-solving, to artistic expression, could help individuals and organizations tap into the creative potential that lies beneath the surface of conscious thought, that emerges when the conscious mind steps back, when the subconscious is given space, when the conditions are right for incubation, for insight, for the breakthrough that changes everything. The ethical implications of subconscious research are profound, raising questions about autonomy, about manipulation, about the boundaries between influence and control. If the subconscious can be shaped, can be programmed, can be influenced without conscious awareness, then who has the right to do the shaping, the programming, the influencing? Advertising already exploits subconscious processes, uses priming, uses emotional conditioning, uses repetition to create associations, to shape preferences, to influence behavior without conscious awareness. Political propaganda uses the same techniques, targeting the subconscious, bypassing rational thought, creating emotional responses that shape beliefs, that influence votes, that manipulate opinion. As our understanding of the subconscious deepens, as the techniques for influencing it become more sophisticated, the potential for misuse increases, and the need for ethical guidelines for transparency for informed consent becomes more urgent. But the same knowledge that can be used for manipulation can also be used for empowerment, for self-awareness, for the conscious cultivation of the subconscious in ways that align with your values, your goals, your vision of who you want to become. Understanding how habits form gives you the power to create beneficial habits, to replace harmful ones, to design your life intentionally rather than passively absorbing patterns from the environment. Understanding how emotions are processed gives you the capacity to work with difficult feelings, to integrate traumatic experiences, to develop resilience, to cultivate emotional intelligence. Understanding how the subconscious learns gives you the ability to accelerate your own development, to master skills more efficiently, to become the expert, the artist, the person you aspire to be. The journey into the subconscious is a journey into the unknown, into the depths of your own mind, into the patterns that have been shaping you since before you could remember, since before you could speak, since before you were born. It is a journey that requires courage, requires curiosity, requires the willingness to encounter parts of yourself that you have not acknowledged, to see patterns that you have not recognized, to question assumptions that you have not examined. It is also a journey that offers profound rewards, greater self-awareness, greater freedom, greater capacity for growth, for change, for becoming who you truly are, not who you have been conditioned to be, not who others expect you to be, but who you are at the deepest level, in the silent spaces where the subconscious resides, where the self is waiting to be discovered, to be realized, to be lived. And as you drift now into sleep, as consciousness fades and the subconscious takes over, as you surrender to the natural rhythm of rest and restoration, you can trust that this journey continues, that the subconscious is working, is processing, is integrating, is preparing you for tomorrow. For the next moment, for the next breath, you do not need to control it, do not need to understand it fully, do not need to force it. You only need to allow it, to trust it to rest in the knowledge that beneath the surface of your waking mind there is a vast intelligence, a silent architect, a guardian. A guide, a source of wisdom that has been with you always, that will be with you always, that is working now, in the darkness, in the silence, in the depths, building the foundation of who you are becoming, one neural pathway at a time, one moment at a time, in the infinite, eternal, timeless space of the subconscious mind.